Well, good afternoon and welcome to our webinar. My name is Peter Frank and I'll be leading this training session for you today. It is called Preparing for a New Fiscal Year with Church360 Ledger. Now, again, my name is Peter Frank. I'm the Senior Manager here at Concordia Technology Solution. I've been with our group for over 11 years now, or I should say been with our company for over 11 years. I've been with our group for about 6 years. So I've been around the church software division since 2012, and we launched Church360 Ledger in 2014. So this was the first product that I really got to see from almost the beginning all the way to the launch. Many of our other ones were well underway before we launched them or had already launched. But Church360 Ledger holds a special place in my heart because I got to be involved pretty much the entire way. So it is a fantastic tool and I'm eager to show it to you today. But before that, a few housekeeping items. So as you can see, my contact information is on the screen. Email is the best way to reach me. My phone number, I'll get you to my office phone here, which I always like to point to and make sure it's on forward to voicemail. So don't try calling me now. It won't ring, hopefully, if I get everything set right. But you can leave me a message at any time. I'm not often in my office, so messages are usually the best and I'll get back to you. But otherwise, my email is a fantastic way to reach out. All right, a little bit of housekeeping, like I mentioned. We're planning about 55 minutes for presentation. I tend to go over the whole amount, and so 55 really gets us close to that hour. I'm only leaving about 5 minutes for question and answers. We've got a decent sized group, but I tend to find with Ledger, I'll get questions after the fact. So feel free to ask questions throughout. You can put them in the chat. If I run out of time and I don't get all of them, I'll email you afterwards, but I tend to get through most of them. It helps if you ask them throughout because I can see in my queue how many I have left, and I can set up enough time to make sure to answer them at the end. All right, finally, we are recording this webinar and we'll be sharing it later on. So if you're one of those who are watching after the fact, I'm sorry you couldn't join us, but I'm glad you still got to watch. If you are watching live, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to be here. I know how hard that is in the church. I wish we could offer real flexible scheduling for the webinars, but with the different time zones that we serve and the fact that everybody's schedule is different, we usually just put them on a time that seems reasonable and hope people show up, and it tends to work out pretty well. So thanks for being here, but if not, thanks for watching the recording. All right, a little bit about ourselves. I mentioned I'm the Senior Manager of Concordia Technology Solutions. We are the Church Administration Division of Concordia Publishing House. We've been producing software for churches since 1984, which is just kind of mind-blowing when you think that software was an important part of our business back in the early 1980s. But as technology has changed, we've changed with it. And Church360 Ledger is one of those latest iterations of technology in the church. Speaking of which, that's what we're talking about today, Church360 Ledger. Now, Church360 Ledger is part of the Church360 suite, which you may be familiar with. I know most of our Ledger customers are also customers of Church360 members. That is our church management software. And while I'll mention it briefly today, I'm not going to go into much detail. We lead webinars on that other times. We've got plenty of information on our website, so you can check it out there. Also part of the suite is Church360 Unite. Now this is our church website builder and it really doesn't have much tie-in with Ledger at all. Members is kind of the middle of that wheel where all the spokes go that kind of makes it all go around. But Ledger and all three of them work well on their own and they integrate well kind of playing off members. So we won't go into Unite in too much detail, but I am leading a webinar about that tomorrow if you're interested in learning more. All right, a little bit about Church360 Ledger. First off, it is church finance software. If the name didn't give it away, I want to make sure to clarify that. It is all about managing your chart of accounts, your general ledger, where all of your transactions of money coming in and money going out is stored. This is different than members, which manages your contributions, which tracks who is giving what. This tracks the lump sum deposits and all of the individual transactions. They're more often expenses than income, as much as I know we at the church would love to get more income, but you got to keep track of it all. We have designed Church360 Ledger to be intuitive, secure, and focused on the primary customer, which is those in the church. Now, intuitive is a buzzword that means different things for different people. But as we have focused on what it means to be intuitive, you'll see that in a few minutes as I explained it. It really goes back to the layperson. It's not designed for the person with the accountant degree who knows credits and debits off the top of their head. This is supposed to be intuitive for the average layperson. And of course, secure, it has to be secure. In this world of technology and hacking and all of the bad stuff that comes with technology, technology can be a blessing if it's got proper security. So we're going to look through all of that in just a few minutes. All right, but before that, I want to let you know I've made a few assumptions about you. First off, I am assuming you are familiar with church finances. Now, I'm not expecting you or assuming you to be an expert. That is generally not the case in churches where they all have financial experts, although some do, and it's a wonderful blessing. But I'm expecting you to at least be familiar with your church's finances, even if you are not familiar with finances as a whole. I'm assuming you're new to Church360 Ledger. I'll ask that question in a few minutes. How many of you who are here are new, and how many of you are already existing users? But even if you have been using Church360 Ledger for a little while, there are plenty of tips and tricks you can pick up along the way. But this is really meant for those who are just getting started. Finally, I'm assuming you are extremely busy, because I have yet to meet a person either as a paid staff person or a volunteer in a church office that is not extremely busy. So that's a safe assumption. I like to throw that in there to at least make sure that I get that last one. All right, well, let me ask you to confirm some of that. Tell me a little bit about yourself. I'm going to put a few polls up there. The first one is to ask you which role best describes you, your primary role in the church. So let's launch that. All right, very good. I think that is up and running. Let me know which role is your primary role. I know many of you wear multiple hats. My hope is that you can at least identify the one that is most common. All right, and it looks like our entire group is in that financial manager role, which I've never had before, and we don't have a small group either, so that's great. The topic at hand kind of leads it to that. Very good. All right, the next one, are you currently using Church360 Ledger in your congregation? Yes, no, and no, but planning to subscribe soon. All right, let's see. It looks like we've got another 100% under yes. Fantastic. All right, and then finally, what would you consider, for all of you who are users, what would you consider your Church360 Ledger skill level to be? I'll give that a minute. I do want to thank you. You guys are all very quick with answering that. That's not often the case with polls. Sometimes it takes a moment to figure out. All right, well, we are kind of split right down the center. I've got some advanced, some novice, but most in the intermediate, so that's very good. All right, well, thank you very much for answering those. That helps a lot. So let's go through our outline for today. Let me make sure, there we go. All right, so we're going to do, throughout the whole thing, an overview of the software, but I'm really going to get into an overview of how we made, or why we made Church360 Ledger the way it did. And I'll play off of that as we go into these details. Then I'm going to demonstrate the year-end process. Now, for those of you who are used to something like Shepherd Staff, our PC-based church management software, this might seem a little bit different because the year-end process is not a single process. In fact, you can keep going forward within your next year before finalizing everything in the previous year. It's very dynamic, and that may make some of you who are accountants a little uncomfortable, but I'll show you as we go through why that's the case. Finally, we're going to take some question and answers at the end, and like I said before, please ask those as you think of them. Put them in the chat whenever it comes to the top of your head. It'll get it off of your head and into our queue, and that'll help me be able to look at the queue and see how many I have at the end. So there we go. All right, let's talk about what are the thoughts behind Church360 Ledger, because a lot went into this. There are plenty of software options out there for finances, but what are the thoughts behind one meant for a church? So first off, church finances, we know, as you probably know, are often managed by volunteers. That's just the reality of the situation. Larger churches will have paid staff people doing it. Smaller churches don't have that luxury. And if you have to choose between paying a pastor and paying a financial person, Well, most churches are going to pay the pastor, and sometimes the pastor ends up being the financial person, which is not a good position to be in, but that's the reality of the life in the small church. So we understand that as often as a church can get a paid staff person, they do, but more often than not, it's a volunteer. Now, we also understand that most volunteers are not accountants. It's a wonderful blessing when that volunteer is, but that doesn't always happen that way. So we've kept that in mind to know that our users of Church360 Ledger are most likely not paid accountants. So because of that, accountability is even more important in the church than anywhere else. Certainly it's important with all finances, but even more so in the church because offerings are what fills the bank accounts. That's money given from people from their heart to serve the Lord. That's really important to make sure there's accountability in there. So accountability is two things. Accountability is preventing the ill-intentioned from doing wrong. Often you'll hear on the news of somebody who is embezzling funds from the church. Now, there's no foolproof way that software can stop it because software is about what's going in and what's going out. And it's not required to enter in your transactions when they're illegal transactions. So we can't stop it, but we can prevent ill intention from doing wrong in several different ways. And some of that is just making sure that there is an audit of all things that happen. And I'll show you that later on. But another way of having accountability in the church is preventing the well-intentioned from making mistakes. And as we look back at that first point, that often those who are managing the church's finances are volunteers and they're not accountants, mistakes can happen. And so whatever we can do to prevent that, we do. And that's going to be our first part as we look at transactions here in just a few moments. So we designed Church360 Ledger to increase accountability, to prevent mistakes. And as we go about talking about the year-end tasks, you'll see that throughout. Now, a lot of these tasks are not just done at the end of the year, but we're going to put this presentation in that mindset of year-end. And you may be thinking that it's middle of June. What are we doing talking about the year-end? Well, I know for my church, we are wrapping up our year-end this week. And for many churches, it's this week or the end of next month. Those non-calendar fiscal years are key, especially when your church has a school with it. So that's why we're talking about it now. We'll keep this available for the end of the calendar year too, for those people who are on that actual calendar year with their fiscal year. So the year-end tasks that we are talking about today, first off, entering transactions. You know, that's something you do throughout the year. You're not going to stop doing that or start doing that at the year end, but you want to enter your final transactions first, and nothing can happen to close off the year until those are done. Then we're going to show how you can reconcile your asset accounts. Match that up with what your bank statements say. Make sure everything is in balance before you close the year. And then we'll print those final reports. The reporting in Church360 Ledger is extremely flexible in that it's built in with all your different views. There's a few key reports that you can print out, but it's still within your interface. And so we'll show you how to use that. It's almost too simple. Sometimes people get confused and think, well, that's it? This is what I thought I had to do, was to go and create this big monster report with all these different criteria. It's pretty straightforward. I'll show you that too. Finally, then, we'll start looking ahead to the next year. What accounts need to be updated? What do we need to disable? What do we need to say this account is no longer active? What accounts need to be added? Are there new ministries starting up? New things that need to be tracked separately? We'll look at updating your chart of accounts. Then we'll go through setting the budget for each of your income and expense accounts to give you an idea of what you're looking at. And finally, we'll look at who needs to be added and removed as a user. As the church year changes or your fiscal year changes, often new people are elected to different boards or to the treasurer position, and you may need to change that out. Now, here's the weird thing with this, and I don't know if weird's the right word, but it can be a little bit difficult, is that a lot of these things happen simultaneously. It's not a step 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way through 6 kind of process. You might be doing these things at the same time. So you may have a new treasurer coming in that you need to add as a user, and you do that before you finish your transactions, because if you're using this fiscal year, June's not even done yet, and you may have transactions coming up this week. So I want to make sure I clarify that this is not a linear process. There's certain things that are prerequisites for others, but I'm sure you're not starting your budget this week if you're moving into the new fiscal year next week. Those things just are not best practices. All right, I've talked enough. Let's jump in here, get into the details. I'm going to go right to the home screen of Church360 Ledger. I like to lay the groundwork because then I can spend most of the time within the software showing off everything. Now, if you are not real familiar with Church360 Ledger, this is the home screen. And let me make sure, good, that is showing up there. And my phone just buzzed. I had that turned off and it didn't, so I'm going to turn that off now. Good. All right, so your home screen has your top navigation. You can see some of these views have little icons next to it with numbers. That's activity that needs to be addressed. Then we've got below that your what we call omnibar, where you can switch through chart of accounts, and your new transaction button here. Then your ledger, and this is on the home page, your ledger for all your transactions, but you can use these big blocks here to drill in deeper. And we're going to look at that in a little while as we get into reconciling accounts. But the first thing we're going to do is talk about transactions. Now, when you go and enter a new transaction, you click the button, and you can do this from any screen. If you've been using Ledger for a little while, I'm sure you're familiar with that. But we know that you don't, as you're entering transactions, you may be looking at other information to see, okay, what account do I put that on? Where did I put this last time? You can just click on it and do it on any screen. Now there's 5 different types here. The 4 types at the beginning are what we call transaction paths. So if I go and click New Transaction Transfer, it'll take over my screen. It's kind of a pop-up, but it fills the screen, and it'll give me this nice path where I can put the memo to start, then I put my initial account, and then I put my secondary. So let's say we were wanting to transfer money from savings into checking. So let's say you're going from a restricted account and you're making your year-end purchase that's based off that restricted account, and you need to move this over so that you can write the check. So you can put a memo that says moving from restricted. And in fact, I probably, if using that example, I should have a restricted account there, but this is just an example to show how easy transactions work. Now I selected the savings account, which is an asset account, and it clarifies that for me after I select it. Now here's the fun part, is that over on the right-hand side, I can only put an asset account. I can't transfer money from an asset to an expense. That doesn't make any sense. Now you might have a journal entry where you're doing that, where you're making a payment from an asset to an expense. We'll look at that separately. Transfer allows you to know exactly what you're doing, that you're transferring from Central Trust Savings to Central Trust Checking. Now you'll see here that it makes the transaction down below in this Tchart Accounting, where you have your credits and your debits. I'm going to jump back to my slide here real quick, and since most of you are not experts but familiar with this, I'm going to jump to this view here. This view here, I'm sure many of you are familiar with if you've done accounting before, but if you are not an accountant, it may be quite confusing. I know for me it is. I have a little printout on my wall here that has that exact thing, so that I have in my mind, what does it mean to debit an asset? What does it mean to debit a credit? I'm sorry, debit a liability. You can see here the debits and credits. Oops, let me go back, sorry. I jumped too far back. There we go. You can see here that when you credit a liability, you're increasing it. When you credit an asset, you're decreasing it. All of this makes sense to accountants. It's hard for me to remember, and I like numbers, but this is different than numbers. These are financial rules. Well, what we do with Ledger is that we do this for you in the background and put it in the foreground so you can see the results. But that's what those transaction paths are. So we know that if we're wanting to move money from an asset, in this case, moving it from Central Trust Checking, or from savings to checking, we're going to credit that asset to decrease it, and debit that asset to increase it. So I'll go ahead and hit save, and that will happen. There we go, 626, there is my transfer, and my memo is in there too. Now, if I go back up to new transactions and go to deposit, I have a little bit different of a view. So first off, I have a memo, just like I'll have a memo and a date no matter what. But then I've got a payee, which is optional for deposits. But if you are doing a return or something and need to show that on that payee's record, you can put that in there. So that's why it's optional. But when you're making a deposit, you're saying, I'm going to put money into Central Trust checking. We're going to put $100 in there, and it's got to come from income. This is not a transfer. So my only option here is income. And so it'll show me just my income accounts. Now, in this case, we have quite a few income accounts, but let's just say it's the general fund. It'll make that transaction for me here, and I can go and click and save it. So again, the view changes slightly. What you're doing is you're just creating journal entries. And that's one of those transaction types, is that you can create a journal entry where all you're doing is selecting the account and what debits and what credits occur. But you're not having to go back to our view here and figure out, okay, I'm making a payment, it's going from this account, that's an asset, it's gonna hit my expense, I need to decrease my asset, so that's going to be a credit, and then increase my expenses, that's a debit, put it that way. You can certainly do that if that makes sense. But this is one of those places where it can very easily become a well-intentioned mistake. So we have journal entry there. Now, let's jump back a little bit to payment. Payment is probably the most common type of transaction because in most churches, you are receiving income on a weekly basis. You may have some things that come throughout the week, but for the most part, it's Sunday offerings. Payments can occur very regularly, and you might be making electronic payments on the due dates, or you might be writing checks for these. They're very similar between payment and check. So with payment, you got your memo, your payee, all of that. You choose what assets, so we're going to do checking, and you put in your amount, $50, and then it'll show you either your expense accounts or your liabilities, because those are where you get the payment. Now, if it's an expense account, that means that that payment is going straight to whoever is the payee, the person who's receiving that payment. And if it's going to your liability, that means that it's money that you're going to owe. So if you put it on a church credit card, you would put that here first, and you would say that or if you're paying off a credit card, that's where you do it. If you're putting on a credit card, that would be your liability. So if I don't know if we have a credit card on this account. No, we don't. That's okay. You have any kind of liabilities. Yeah, this is also where you might do your payroll deductions, things like that, that you're going to compile and send at the end of the month. So that's what you can do. You have your checking. We'll go ahead and say that let's say this is the gas bill, and it's $50. So it puts together your transaction for you, but then you can also make this a recurring transaction. Say this happens every single month on the first Thursday, something like that, and you can just call that gas bill and save that. So transactions are a big part of your daily use of Ledger. It's especially important for the year end to get these last things in place. So for you who are taking over the accounting going into the new fiscal year and you're learning this, hopefully this helps you get an idea of the type of transactions that you can do and how easy you can use these transaction paths. All right, let's close that and move on to the next subject, which is reconciling accounts. Now, of course, you don't want to do this until after your fiscal year has ended, at least for the last month. If you haven't reconciled previous months, now is a great time to do that. You should be doing that once a month at the end of the month. So the way you get to that is you would go to your assets. And I should clarify, this is just for assets accounts. When you are reconciling your bank accounts, you're going to get a statement from your checking or savings account or whatever kind of asset accounts you have, and you're going to go through and make sure that all the transactions that brought money in or took money out are there, so that your balance of that account in Church360 Ledger matches your balance within that financial institution. So it's in assets, and you click assets, and then you click down to the account level. Now we'll take a look at this in a little while as we get into chart accounts. You have what are called categories and actual accounts. and we can only reconcile accounts because that's how in the real world they are. You have a bank account. You don't have a bank category that summarizes all of that. They'll send you your statements by account. So we'll go into central trust and we'll go into checking. And once I get down to that level, then central trust checking, there's my actual account. I know it's an account, and I know it's an asset account because it gives me this reconcile button. And all I have to do is click reconcile, and it takes me into this very different mode. We kind of joked that it was the Hulk mode because it's so green. And people often get angry when reconciling accounts because it's not a simple process. You're looking back and forth at different things. We try to make it as simple as possible because we know it's not a fun task. So as you are reconciling the central trust checking, you see a number of different things. First off, you see here a statement date. And when you click on the date, it will filter your transactions by anything before that date. So let's say if I go to June 30th, now my deposit will show. Now, I also get to enter in my starting and beginning balance. Now, these show up on your statement. They may not be identified as starting and beginning balance, but it'll show in that line. So if, for example, let's see here, I'm going to go ahead and type in my starting balance is 172,281.18. And I'm going to put in my ending balance of 172,431.18. Now, you can see that the statement difference is $150. The next thing you do is you go through and look at your statement and say, all right, here's this transaction. So this looks like a transfer or a deposit in that case when you see it, depending on how your bank puts it in there and depending on how you brought it in. But really on your books, it's a transfer. You click on that checkbox here. Now my selected difference goes up and it'll show under here the types. Then I'll put in my deposit as well, and that's the $150. Now once I have that, I can still go and see how it's totaled up. But my difference, my off by is 0. And if I've hit all of the different transactions on my statement, I know it's ready to reconcile. Now, that is an oversimplification. And anybody who's ever balanced their bank account or their own personal checking account knows that it's not quite that simple. But really, it's just more work. It's not any more complex until you start missing transactions, either on your checking account or your statement or in your ledger. If it's in Ledger, it's a lot easier to fix here because you can go and enter in that transaction if you know it's occurred and you know the details. But if it's off on your statement, then something was entered wrong into Ledger or wasn't actually done here. That goes back into that accountability. So if you start seeing things that vary, then you might pick up on some mistakes. And it's either mistakes or, like I said before, ill-intentioned actions. This is the kind of thing that helps provide security, that process of reconciling your bank accounts. It's not so much the tool. The tool is to make that process easier. The tool is Church360 Ledger, but that process is what builds up that good accountability. So after you're done here, you can click Save, and it'll only let you click Save if it balances. Now, you may have some that don't balance that you need to go back and do. There's different schools of thought on whether you should do it now, reconcile what you've got, and then go do those transactions. I find it's easier to kind of go through, do almost a trial reconciliation, make sure it all matches, go change the things you need to, come back and finalize it in that way. But it's up to you. So we'll go ahead and save that. All right, the items were reconciled. And let's see, I think, oh yeah, here we go, it's right there. Once the items are reconciled, once those line items are reconciled, you get a little indicator over on the far left-hand side that says these have been reconciled. There you go, hover over the actual lock. That means you can't change them. You can't edit them. You can't do anything to it. And that word edit will scare accountants. So let me talk about that for a second. So here we have a transfer from Central Trust Checking. Let's click on that, 518. A transfer from Central Trust Checking to Central Trust Savings. Now, that may get a little scary if you think about editing that. It could have been a typo. So if you see here, I can't edit these transactions, but if I go in here, it's $250. I click on that and say, actually, it was $225. And I hope you can't hear that. There's a huge rainstorm going on, and now I'm hearing sirens. So I apologize if the sound is too large. It seems like everything is going to get in the way today between construction and rain and sirens outside. So I apologize for that. All right. I've gone in here and I've changed this, and I've changed it from 250 to 225. It edits my debits and credits and gives me a place for an amendment memo. So I'm going to say this was a typo. And when I click save, it updates the transaction. Now, for those who are accountants who are watching, you may say, no, you can't do that. You need to create a journal entry. You need to keep track of that. If that's the way fraud happens, is by editing transactions. Well, here's a little bit of an explanation. When you edit a transaction, over here on the far right, you get a little red arrow. When I click on that arrow, oops, I clicked on the transaction. When I click on the arrow itself, it shows that edit. Now, what has actually happened is that Ledger has automatically applied a journal entry and linked those two transactions together. So all of the movement was still tracked, but they're linked together because for the average person, it's easier to edit a transaction than to create a new journal entry that reverses certain portions of it. So it does all the work on the back end. Your full audit trail is there, but it works like you might expect. You're just editing something. So let me take this time to go up to the top underneath reports and go to event log. This is your audit trail. So today, around this time, I created a new transaction, this number right here, a revision of this transaction. And these are all our internal numbers, so you can see they're always unique. So if I go and click created a new transaction, here is my journal entry. You see, I did the debits and credits for $25 there. That corrected the original transaction. And that's it. And the memo says this was a typo. That was it. All right. So that is how you would go about your kind of month-end process. And if you started, I know you're all Ledger users, if you started with a free trial, you probably may have thought, well, why is it 37-day free trial? Well, it's because of this, that year-end process, or sorry, month-end process of reconciling your accounts is so important, and you can't do it till month-end, that if you wanted to do a full month, we give you a week to reconcile it after that. All right, let's move on to the next thing. Now, we talked before about different types of transactions. I didn't mention the print queue, I probably should have. One thing you'll want to do at the end of your fiscal year is make sure all of your checks are printed out. If you get a queue, sometimes people put them in the queue and do it all at the end of the week, or do a bunch of transactions and at the end of the day print them. You want to make sure that that is cleared out. We're not going to go into that in too much detail right now, but that's an important part of that year-end process. Another thing is your pending transactions. That is the second tab over here. Now, in this case, these transactions are coming over from Church360 members. These are your donations that are your offerings that have been given, and you can create deposits for them. That's another thing that you don't want to forget. Now, you may have some pending transactions or some checks to print that are meant for the next fiscal year if you've already moved forward in it. It's just something to keep an eye on. I'm not going to get into that in any more detail because we've got more than enough to cover here. All right, so we talked about reconciliation. The next thing is printing your year-end reports. Now, one way that you can print reports is by going through and getting down to the individual account level. So if you wanted to show how many offerings you got in the general fund, you would go down to the general fund and you would pick your year. Now, we are going, in this account, it's off of a fiscal year that's tied to the calendar year. But if it wasn't, you could change it to that time frame. You can also change your dates in any way. So like if you click 2018, it automatically sets it for the full year. If you were doing a quarter, it would update your quarter. And depending on what your fiscal year is, it's going to take the first 3 months of your fiscal year, even if it's not a calendar year. You can also go down to the individual months. and click on it, and it'll assume the current month. So if you want to print last June, that's a little bit harder. But let's just go to this current fiscal year, 2018, and these are all the transactions on this account. Now, the most basic kind of report, and you probably aren't doing this for all of your accounts, but just it shows the line items by account. And this is good for ministries like youth ministry or fellowship or Bible studies. You know, anything that's going under an expense account would be good. If you want to see special donations, maybe you send letters at the end of the year. You can look at it this way. Church360 members is also good for it, but I'm thinking if it's going into special funds, you may want to see the totals that were contributed that year. It's really easy to navigate to those through your tree here, or just by typing on it. I think, let's see, Vacation Bible School. If I start typing in that, I can go to the Vacation Bible School Offerings Fund and see that there. So that's one way of doing it. Actually, let me go back so I can show you where to print. Up here in the top right, there's a print button. And if you wanted to print that, you could print it out here, and it shows that kind of tree. The other thing, actually, there's going to the actual print preview. My computer's going a little slow this morning. There we go. So that's one way of doing it. That's not super fancy. It's more just informational. The other way you can do it is export to Excel. And it'll export all of those line items. Let me make sure, where's Excel going to show up today? Over on this screen. I have 3 monitors, so whenever I open Excel, it goes to the last place the spreadsheet was opened. So you can see all the details there. Now, again, these are not pretty financial reports, they're just informational reports. What I would encourage you to do, and we'll talk about this at the very end with roles and users, is that you don't need to print out every single report when you have access to it here. So if you wanted to give your ministry leaders access to their specific accounts that they manage, that they are the stewards of, you could do that, and you could do it just for those accounts so that you're not having to print these out. And that was kind of the thought behind Church360 Ledger with reports, is that we don't need to create a report for everything because it's designed for people to be able to go in and access and see things, not necessarily have one person print it and hand it to everybody. So there's that. But there are your standard financial reports. So there is the general ledger report, which shows all of your different line items, and then you can filter it by things like type. So you can get here to your check register. You can go by payee. Let's say you wanted to just show all of your Ameren Electric. You can show that there. You could also do it by account. And so that gives you a little bit more detail than just going by the standard view. So if you want to go to general fund, you could then group it by account as well. And you can have multiple funds in there. So if you want a subset. So it becomes a little bit more powerful than your other tool, your other view there, which was your general ledger, those line items. But this gives you some more tools. And again, you can export to Excel or print. You can also go to your statement of income and expense. And this is a very common thing, especially as you're getting near the end of the year. Before your fiscal year ends, you think, okay, are we balanced for the year? So this does not have a full year's worth of transactions, but we have income and we have expense and the difference of it, and then we can expand from there. So that helps with that. You also have percentage of the budget, remaining budget. In this case, we haven't budgeted for 2018. We're going to take a look at budgeting in a few minutes. But you have this as part of your income and expense report. You have your chart of accounts report, which shows the starting balance, the ending balance, the debits, credits, and change. And I should clarify, these dates that are implied here between starting and ending are all tied to the date that you selected in your date selector and carry through as you go from page to page. So you're not having to reset the date every time you want to view the report. If you want to change the dates, you change the dates, and everything about your experience from then on is about those dates. So there's it can be a little bit hard to understand when you first get in there. It's like, well, where do I set the date for my report? Well, it's the date you've been using all the way through. So your chart of accounts has your starting and ending balance, debits, credits, change, and change percentage. So change amount and change percentage. And you can go through and see everything in your chart of accounts. Assets, liabilities, income, and expense are all there. Now, if you want to see that same thing, but just your balance sheet, which tells you your assets less liabilities. That's what this is. And so you can see, all right, we have almost $400,000 in our assets and liabilities about almost $2,000. Now, for most churches, that's going to be really good. That's probably not what most churches have. If you're larger, you may have $400,000 in your assets. Liability sometimes is more than that. So, but yeah, the ending balance shows that assets less liabilities for it as a whole. So those are your key financial reports, because everything else is available within the account level. Now, one other thing that you may want to have as a year-end report, and it just depends on how you operate and how much you have paid out to certain people, but you can go into your pays and view, their history. I clicked on the wrong thing. If you hover over and click in your history, you can print this out, and this serves the purpose of the year-end report for them to show their income. So that is one way of doing that. Often with like payroll, there's a different payroll service that does all of those year-end reports for your employees. And we utilize a partner named Paychex. They work with Concordia Plan Services. They are a fantastic financial institution that handles all your payroll and your HR things. Shouldn't call them a financial institution. Financial processor. They'll take care of paying your employees and give you the transaction data to import into Church360 Ledger. So that's why Payees is just for those rare instances where you are needing to print. I think it's the 1099. All right, so that was the final section on print reports. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. We're going to move on to the next section, which is add or remove accounts. So that's kind of how you finish up the year. In fact, I forgot to show you fiscal years, which is kind of important. It's got a high level of importance, but it's so simple. Let me switch over here first, and then I'll talk about it. So if you go to settings and you go to fiscal years, this is where you set your current fiscal year. Now, I say it's kind of important. It actually is really important to lock down your previous fiscal years. But I say it's kind of important only because it's not that hard to do. So you see here, these are the history of fiscal years. There is a lock button by all the previous years. The current fiscal year is 2018. And oops, I've got some, I thought I closed my notifications. There we go. The current fiscal year that we're in right now is 2018, January 28th to December 2018. You'll see here down under 2017, I have this green button that says, that is meant to be able to unlock it. That means right now that 2017 is locked. As you move into the next year, all you have to do is lock it. So let me show you. I'm going to unlock 2017, and this is what it'll look like. So 2016 is locked, but the button conveys the action you're going to take. So if I want to lock 2017, I just click that red lock button, and it's locked. That's it. You don't have to do anything else. That's how you close your year end. It's not a big process. Now, if I want to go and do a new transaction, and let's say go back to 2017, I can't. You see, once you lock the fiscal year, that means no more transactions come into play. Now, we're not going to lock 2018 because 2018 is not over. Now, a strange situation that we account for, and it does happen, it's strange, but it's not common. If it's common in your church, I apologize, because that should not be the case. But maybe you want to change your fiscal year from a calendar year to a non-calendar year, like July through June. If you did that, you can do that from this fiscal year too, and say change the starting month of the next fiscal year to July. Click Save. Your new fiscal year has been created. Let me refresh. Oops, there we go. So current fiscal year is January 2018 to June 2018. So we have a shortened fiscal year. My next fiscal year will be July 1st to June until the end of June, June 30th, 2019. So I have the 6-month fiscal year, and then I'll have a full year. And so it'll be a short fiscal year there. That's one of those other things you can do. If there's a time to do that, it's at year end, but it doesn't happen often. Now I can just go through, switch it back, change the starting month. Thank you very much. We'll refresh it. There we go, January to December now. So that is pretty much it with fiscal years. Like I said, it's very important, but it's not very difficult. And that's why those steps before it are important. Now you can still print financial reports from previous years. You just can't edit transactions. You can't create new transactions. Well, you can't create new transactions, which means you can't edit a transaction, because by editing a transaction, you're creating a new transaction that is just a journal entry. So it all ties together. That's why I went through those first 3 steps. All right, now let's go back to our accounts view. We're going to talk about moving forward into the new year. So one thing that you'll want to do is go through and review your chart of accounts. Now you probably, or hopefully, already have this all set up. You have a good idea of how you use it year in, year out. But there may be some things that change. So maybe a ministry is starting or a ministry is ending. So we'll go to the chart of accounts, and it's divided up. You've got your assets, liabilities, income, and expense. You may have a new bank account that you want to create. You may have a new source of income that comes through. So maybe you have started a new fundraiser, and let's call it Summer Festival, miscellaneous. We'll do a new account, and we call it Summer Festival. You can put whatever account number you want. That's completely optional. And the initial balance should be 0. The initial balance should always be 0, except when you first start off with Church360 Ledger. Otherwise, you're creating money out of thin air, essentially. And it won't even let you create those kind of after the first transaction has been completed. But we'll go ahead and click Submit. Move this under miscellaneous income, and we'll click Save. There we go. We've created a new account. Now, maybe you are saying, all right, we are cutting off some of these expense accounts. We're no longer going to have that kind of expense. So maybe your lawn care is now going to be provided by volunteers, and you're not going to have to pay for it. So if you click on lawn care, there are fees already in there. Let me just take a step back. It shows the current balance of that account. It's an expense account, so there's not actual dollars in there. That means that $100 has been spent on your lawn care. If you click on that, you can deactivate it, and it'll refresh, and it'll give you this inactive account. Now your balance is still in there. You can't go and create any more transactions on it. Once that account balance is down to 0, then you could delete it. So we'll go to this one here. We'll deactivate. That was snow removal. And then actually after that fiscal year ends, then you can delete it. So that's really what you want to do. So because we're still in the current fiscal year, I can't remove it. But you can deactivate it as you move into the next fiscal year. Then you can delete it. Or actually, I think that stays deactivated. Either way, you can't put new transactions to it. So that's the important thing, is that you're reviewing that, because you want to deactivate any accounts that you're not going to be putting transactions to. One good way of doing that is looking at anything that hasn't had any transactions this year. Now you'll have to use your good judgment to say, well, that's a once every 3 years expense, so we're going to keep that account open. We're just not going to run a balance. We're not going to budget anything for it. That's up to you, but that's how you'd go through and do that. And I don't know if it comes across here, that it gets kind of grayed out as you go through it. All right, now let's see. We have added or removed any accounts that we need to do. The next thing is to set your budgets. So if I go here under settings and I go to budgets, oh, I gotta confirm my changes. Ledger helps you remember to confirm those by not letting you leave the page until you've done that. And there we go. So it saved my budget. So I've saved my accounts. Now we're moving into the budgets page, and there's a lot that goes on this page. So I have my screen zoomed in. At a certain point, you can't zoom in anymore, and it starts to give you a horizontal scroll. But in many of the views, or most of the views, it narrows it down to the same as the menu. But in the budgets, it explodes it to the very end. We do that because we know a lot of people want to see 12 months at a time. And if you have good eyesight, you can see 12 months at a time with smaller print. But we can only make the print so small. So the more you zoom in, at some point, it creates a horizontal scroll for you. but I like seeing it all at once, just like we have here. Now, I can change all of my budgets at one time. So you'll see the gray are kind of summaries of it. Here, the white lines, right rows, are the actual accounts. Oops, why is my mouse not scrolling? Let me refresh that. I can hear my computer running, so something is taking some time. A lot of times when I'm streaming, it'll be real heavy on my processor. Let's try that again. Now it's working, it's just going a little slow. All right, so here we go, general fund. You have total on the far left, and then each of the 12 months to the far, or to the right. Now, if I go in here and type in a number like 500 into my general fund number, it'll split it across all the 12 months. And if it doesn't split evenly, it'll leave the last however many months a little short compared to the first ones. So you can see here now all of a sudden it's 4167. I can also go in month by month and enter in my amount. So 50 for mission, 50, 50, I'll leave a few, and then go to 50. Okay, so you can do that way, and then your total on the left-hand side becomes the sum of all of those. So it kind of serves dual purposes. If I go into general fund and I change this 4167 to 75, it'll update my general fund total. If I go in here and I change that to 540, it'll update the one that I had overridden. So it's a both and. You can do the total and you can do the individual month, but one of them will override the other. So you can't just go into one month and expect that to flow from the rest. You have to go to the total. So that's one way of doing it. The next way you could do it is if you're going under like youth fund, you have these previous year budget, previous year actuals below that. And I can go in and click any of these numbers and apply it to that month. Or I can click to the far left where underneath the fund name and apply all of them to it. So that's pretty handy. That's a good way of starting off by saying, all right, let's put in what we did last year. Now you can do that for all accounts up in the top left, change all to last year's budget or last year's actual. That makes this process start off really easily. It fills your screen with the data that you need, and then you can go and make changes from there. Now, sometimes there's things that are happening. So if you start that process in, let's say, you're in April, which is when my church really gets into budgeting. April, May, June, by that time we've spent 3 months working on the budget. By July 1st, we're, oops, sorry, hitting my screen. By July 1st, we're ready to go. So you may want to do some with last year's budget, some with actuals. That's your call, but you can do these all at once. And that's it. So that may seem like a lot of work, and I know we hear people say, is there any way to speed up budgeting? If you've got ideas to speed that up anymore, let us know, because we've taken all the feedback that we've had about using last year's total divided in half, doing it individually. We'd love to make it quicker, but we're not sure how. So the last way I'll show you that is not always quicker, but is quicker for an individual because it's delegating, is to be able to export to Excel and distribute that to other people. And I'll hear that from time to time. That's where you say, you know, I want other people to send me their budgets, but I don't want them to have access to update the budget in Ledger. So you can export this whole screen to Excel, and we'll do that. There we go, it's in my bottom left. Let's see where this opens, probably over on this screen. There you go, and you get this view. Now it's all blank, and I realized I forgot to show one thing, kind of an important thing. At the bottom, there's a Save Changes. You need to hit that, and then it'll lock it into your database. And then when you export to Excel, it'll update. So one way people do it is they say, all right, show everybody last year's budget or show everybody last year's actuals, export it to Excel, and then send everybody the spreadsheet, keeping a master spreadsheet themselves. and then repopulate it in here. I love doing things in Excel. Most of my work is done in Excel. And then what you can do is you can actually just copy and paste back in here as long as you're going to the right cell. And you don't even have to click a cell that's an entry. If you copy and paste it all, it'll update it. So yeah, looks like I had more to it than before. Oh, I know what I did. Let's see here. If we do like January to June, starting in income. Yeah, it didn't override because I didn't do all of income, so I still had other social concerns down here. So that's the key thing. That's because I switched it around. If I had exported exactly what I had saved, that would be different. But that's an easy way of doing it. And if you need any assistance with it, because it's not right in front on the screen, it's not import from Excel because we can't lock down the spreadsheets without making them unusable or uneditable. So we just allow you to copy paste. The last thing, and I'm already 1 minute over my time, and I've got some questions coming in. So let me show you the last thing here is users and roles. So in Church360 Ledger, one of the great things about using this is that other people outside the church office could log in and do the things they need to do, even if it's just review financial information. They're not entering anything. You can have as many users as you want, and users can have as many roles as they want. So for example, a role might be, let's see, a council member, where you can manage the chart of accounts, you can view selected accounts, but you can't create transactions. Maybe you can even manage the chart of accounts. Maybe you can view all accounts, but you can't do anything with them. That's a great thing for a council member to stay up to date. And then when you go to add a user, you just say, all right, add users. Let me zoom in, I forgot to do that. Add users, and there's Peter Frank. I want him to just be a council member and do it that way. I'm going to leave myself as administrator right now while I'm doing this. Actually, I'll just cancel out. So you can do different roles for different people, multiple roles for multiple people. That way you could have council member and board of elders as two different roles. And if you're like me and you have both of, you're actually in both of those roles, you can put them together and get the sum of both permissions. All right. There's a lot of information. I'm already over my time, and I've got questions in the queue. So let me go back to my PowerPoint here and show you the final slide, just so that you have this. This is my contact information one last time. I like to show this before I wrap up because, and before I take questions, because if you don't have any questions and you don't want to stick around for them, but you want to ask later, you can take that information down now. So if you are, and I know none of you who attended live are new to Church360 Ledger, but if you're watching this and you'd like some help figuring out if Ledger is right for you, you can talk to one of our software consultants. For those of you who are customers, if you have other questions, our software support team is available. You should have that information. It's also available on our website. So let me get into the questions before we wrap up here. Let's see, please consider adding 2 reports to the 360 Ledger. This is from Jim. One, a year-to-date consolidated income and expense report without clicking each detail account, and a year-to-date detailed income and expense report. This eliminates returning the accounts to detail from consolidated mode. One more wish, a basic trial balance to review each account total with debits equal credits. Thank you. I will pass that on to the team. I do want to make sure, and I don't think this will meet your needs exactly, so you probably already know about this, but I do want to clarify something with the income and expense accounts, or income and expense view. If you go and do, let's say, you're doing January through June. Let's say you're on a calendar year, and you want to see your first 6 months. This income and expense account can be set to year to date. And so you can see what is my year to date budget through the end of June, and what are my year to date income and expenses from January to June. And so that'll give you some of that, but a report without clicking each detail account. I'm guessing you're looking for a little bit more than that. But Jim, I'll take down your name and information and be sure to share that with our development team. Often as we have specific questions, we'll reach back out to people, not all the time. And that may, we always combine it with other feedback for this. So if other people have asked for this type of report, we'll do that too. But I did want to explain that you can do it in this way and do a year-to-date time frame. So let's see. Yeah, and the basic trial balance to review each account total with debits equals credits. That is something that we don't have. You have your chart of accounts report, which you could again put at your current year to date, and that will give you those, but it's not quite what you're asking for. So thank you very much for that feedback, Jim. I'll be sure to pass that along. If anybody else has any questions, please go ahead and reach out to me. I know we are at time now, so I'm going to wrap up here, but my email is always available for you, as is my phone number, although I'm not available at the phone number, always available at the phone number. So sometimes you get lucky and catch me, and other times I'll just call you back. But go ahead and send me an email or give me a call if you have any other questions. And after that, yeah, other than that, I should say, thank you very much for being here today. It's always great to have an engaged audience, and I could tell from watching you guys that you were following along the whole time. So thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.